Community Funds live stream. Today, we're lucky to have with us Karyn Polak, who is a lawyer by training and also an equity and inclusion through finance advocate by passion. I like that, professional and passion coming together. She spent her career at the intersection of value aligned impact and financial services, working within large law firms and financial institutions, and most recently under her own umbrella, which she calls Shift the Prism Advisory, to mobilize capital for the greater good, investing for people, planet, and place. So, Karyn, thank you for joining us today. One of the reasons why we wanted to reach out to you and have you join us is exactly because of your own intro there, in that you've worked within the, shall we say, the corporate gold-lined halls, but also your passion is really in the community and trying to make those connections. So before we really get to the larger part of our conversation here, why don't you tell us a little bit more about your background, how you evolved into the position you are, and one of the things we'll definitely talk about is our common agendas and how we can collaborate for, as you said, the common good.
Well, that sounds great, Stephen. Thank you for having me. And
Sure.
I'm glad to be here in this conversation. It's a critically important one. I think when I think back about why I am on the journey that I'm on, professionally and personally, I really think about it at its heart as I'm incredibly curious about people. And I believe that every single person has potential and has gifts that the world needs. And so if we leave anybody behind, if we're not giving access or opportunity or making the conditions ripe for access and opportunity for everybody, there's a lot that we're leaving behind, not just for that person, but for their family, their communities, for our economy, for the world. So I pursued political science and French when I was in college. And as I started out as a math major and a music minor, I'm a facts and theory person. And so bring all of those things together, it was relatively obvious that I would want to go to law school. It just made sense to me. I only have one person in my family that is a lawyer, but I went to law school. I followed a fairly traditional path. Law schools, generally speaking, teach people to go to big law or big companies. I went to big law. I was always a corporate focused person. So I did corporate finance, capital markets, M&A work for banks and investment banks, and brought that into the in-house practice when I came in-house and way back in the early 2000s at Citigroup. And then worked my way through general counsel roles across traditional finance. So from brokerage to wealth management, asset management, insurance, retirement, and kind of across that board. And in each of those roles, I was trying to figure out, where can I have the greatest impact? So as I got more senior in my professional role, from being a line lawyer to being a chief legal officer, and as I worked my way across finance and really in large multi-segmented, multinational institutions, trying to figure out which parts of the finance world are having the greatest impact on this gap, all those people who don't have access or opportunity. And so how are we closing those gaps? Having worked my way across those two spectrums, I left traditional finance a couple of years ago to focus exclusively on impact investing and community, on the gaps that I saw that I think traditional financial services institutions are not necessarily addressing, whether that's people who don't already have wealth, but how do they gain wealth and build wealth? Or even how do we take agency for ourselves in the financial tools that we have to be able to influence what's happening around us.
What compelled you to go from basically a safe corporate world where you're relatively working within the conventional confines to an area that is still being defined and not quite a consistent part of our ecosystem, even though it's growing and is becoming more and more essential. So how did you make that leap? What was the evolution or the thinking behind that?
It's a great question, and it's I think I would define it in the same way that many people talk about if you're in a position and you want to take a risk, but you don't know quite how to take that risk. And so you do it in bits and pieces until you're ready to actually make the leap off the cliff, so to speak.
Mhm.
So I was always involved in economic development, economic inclusion, in diversity, in community and larger networks. So whether that's regional or global, um, even at big institutions, and always looking both internally and externally in terms of my roles to figure out how I can contribute in the best way to those challenges. And so I would say I was doing it little by little. In Philadelphia in particular, Philadelphia was sort of like the middle ground or middle period for me, where I got involved in the local economy league, in several networks, and working to try and get more women and women lawyers in particular on corporate boards, and many other. I was on the board of the region's largest hunger relief and food access organization. So really trying to work in community at the same time as working internally. And when I always knew that I was sort of trying to prove to myself where I could have the greatest impact. And so I kept checking off the boxes of the places where it didn't seem like that was working, or okay, I'm going to try it here, I'm going to try it here. And I was fortunate in that in my most recent traditional role, which is what moved me to Baltimore, um, there were circumstances internally that made it such that both I had been there for 3 years, which was enough for me to feel like I'd learned what I was going to learn professionally in that role and contributed what I could contribute, and that we agreed mutually. There was a lot of changes in the organization. We agreed that I would step away. And in stepping away, I got the time and resources to really be able to sort of reset and say, okay, it isn't in traditional finance. What are the ways in which I dive deeper and more broad into all those areas that I'd been exploring kind of on the side? And so
Mhm.
that's how I made the leap. The transition, it wasn't like it was overnight. I left traditional finance the next day I started Shift the Prism. It
Mhm.
was an evolution itself, which we
Mhm.
can talk about if you want, um, but really coming to a place where I recognized that the best contribution that I could make is to bring my financial literacy, I'll say, my comfort level with traditional financial tools, my sort of executive strategic experience, and my legal background to this space, to work both at the systems level. How can we actually change the way that systems work, change people's mindsets, change processes, change practices, and on the ground, working person to person and really seeing where people are and what they most need.
Mhm. How long ago was that transition for you? As you said, it was an iterative process, but was that a while ago? Was that recently, or has it always constantly been the kind of part of your professional trajectory?
I think it's always been a part of my professional trajectory, but I left the traditional role and the traditional institution about 2.5 years ago.
Oh, okay.
And so
So,
it's been about 2.5 years of evolution.
wow. So I guess then most of your career was in relatively conventional corporate world, so
Mhm.
to speak. And when you decided to take this leap, what was the reaction of your colleagues at the time? Did they think you're nuts, or did they think, "Wow, you're getting into something that's really going to be, is and has to be our future"? What was the response of your colleagues and your network?
I would say it was varied. So there were the people, including my husband, who thought I had taken a sharp left turn. And they're like, "So what? How did this what happened here?" Um, there were the people who could see the through line, especially the folks that I was working with, both internally, but also in those roles that I mentioned, for example, in Philadelphia, who could see that that was where my passion was. And
Mhm.
so working in equitable economic development and in sort of inclusive finance made a lot of sense to the majority of my network. And then there were the people who I had only just begun to get to know, say here in Baltimore, or who I started to get to know in the last few years of my traditional practice, who were anxious actually, and I feel grateful for this, who were anxious for me not just to stay in that work, but to expand my presence in that work. So you have the people who thought, wow, like you jumped off a cliff. You had the people who said, I can see the continuity and this makes perfect sense to me because I know who you are as a person, what your values are. And then the people who said, I'm so glad to have you here. Please come in more deeply. We need you.
So that last part there, then that's very interesting because human nature says once we're on a track, it's very uncomfortable to kind of
Mhm.
swerve off that track, and unfortunately, that prevents a lot of innovative actions from evolving. Even though the evidence shows that we should start innovating. So with that in mind, then, so when you reached out to your, I guess, more conventional colleagues. Um, were those that got what you're talking about? How have they been able to really bring you in and incorporate your ideas and create a path within their part of the infrastructure that we really need to work with, or was it lip service?
I think so much, and again, I'm grateful for it, but so much an embracing and an encouragement and okay, great, let's figure out what makes sense. Where are the roles that make the most sense? So I'll give you an example. I had been involved with Impact PHL in Philadelphia since its founding in 2016. And and through that period, I think both with Impact PHL and with the Economy League, gotten deeper into the work and deeper into those networks. And when I decided to spend full time doing that work as opposed to it being a side gig, if you will, I was sort of brought deeper into that universe. So
Hmm.
for Impact PHL, I joined the programming committee so that I could help to shape the conversations and the education. So both the education side and the kind of convening side that the organization um, puts forth. And with the Economy League, just getting more involved in their explorations. They have a program called GPlex, so their explorations of other cities and what are the connections, what are the things that we need to bring back to our city, and what are the things that we in our city are doing that we can contribute to others. So I would say number one was like, great, now we can pull more of your time. Many organizations that I had been involved with who then asked me, oh, great, would you join the board? Can you get involved in the finance committee? Can you come and teach in this particular network about the work that you do and this changing of mindsets that you're advocating or that we're working towards? And then also connecting me with other people and institutions that are also in this work so that I could learn more and thus do more. Sort of how do you identify where the greatest gaps are or the greatest needs and figure out how to solve for them.
Mhm. So as part of your transition, it sounds like Impact PHL was an entity or an organization that you're able to tap into that helped you, I guess, make that transition. So explain a little bit about the Impact PHL. It's Philadelphia PHL,
Yeah.
and what they do and why you started working with them as you made your change.
So Impact PHL is an effort to, first of all, to advance the thought leadership within the impact space. So help people to understand what impact investing means, what local investing in particular means. Impact PHL has always been focused on place-based investing. How can we advance
Mhm.
the sort of economic inclusion and thriving within the greater Philadelphia region, but also is very much a thought leader in the impact space in general. They hold Total Impact Summit every May, and it brings together hundreds of people across the globe from all different sectors, all different functions, who are interested in impact, impact through finance, I'll say. And so my I was always attracted to the work that they were doing to bring kind of the coalition of the willing and to expand the coalition of the willing, people who are interested in impact, and how can we do more of that. So they do convening and educating. And every year with the Total Impact Summit, they have tried to be more and more action oriented, because not enough capital is moving, as you and I know. So they have iterated on that. They've created something called Opt Impact, which is a digital platform where local investment opportunities can put forth their pitch, essentially, and where investors can come and look, explore what the opportunities are, and even due diligence on the platform if they wish. There too, though, it's still digital. So you've got one step closer to action, but it's digital, it's impersonal, and the relationships that I think need to build in order for people to actually want to write a check don't necessarily happen through that platform. So one of the founders of Impact PHL, Richard Binswanger, one of the board members, Scott Wheeler, and I, just in the last sort of 12 months, have launched a business called In Localist for catalyzing local investments that is focused on providing that next level relationship connection and exploration. So for people who are interested in local investing but don't know how to go about it, or who are investment advisors but have maybe clients who are asking, or who are involved in the local community and want to advance local investing but don't have the sense of who's doing what in the local market and where the opportunities are, we would provide that middle ground, that facilitation, help you as a potential investor explore what's most interesting to you, make the connections with the opportunities locally, and hopefully actually facilitate capital movement.
So that's interesting. So you're kind of active in several different levels. One, you started out in the conventional corporate world. You made the jump. You found Impact PHL that gave you probably a lot of good insights and information and the confidence to jump into something. And I do know that particular organization is really a well-known and effective organization. But you are right; they're still working in a certain level that doesn't necessarily penetrate to those that aren't, as tech savvy or who are a business person, in the community that just doesn't even know any of this exists. So it sounds like the third part that you've created over the last year is how to take a lot of the work that's being done on, let's say, with Impact PHL, and get it into the communities, both the information, knowledge, and of course, ultimately, capital. Is that a fair assessment of kind of the broad background and sectors that you've worked in?
Yeah, I think that's fair, and it describes, or begins to describe, sort of the three layers or the three levels on which I feel like I'm working today. So one is advisory. I'm on nonprofit boards and advisory committees and networks like Innovation Works here in Baltimore, which works as long-term mentorship for small businesses locally, and more. And the Global Alliance of Impact Lawyers, trying to advance more lawyers in the world who actually understand the impact space. So the advisory space. Then there's the entrepreneurship space, which I think of as In Localist, as us saying, like, let's just actually go do it ourselves. We will go and help to make the connections that are necessary to move capital. And then the third bucket, which is really the consulting, or what kind of the formal part of Shift the Prism Advisory, which is supporting founders and funders and framers like Impact PHL to change people's mindsets, to open people's eyes to the opportunities that they have to advance impact. So if you're a founder, if you have a social enterprise or a nonprofit that is doing great work in your community, but maybe you have one funding stream currently. Maybe it's friends and family, maybe it's donations, maybe it's grants. my job is to help you to understand all the other tools that exist, to
Mhm.
think about who or what category of people or investors would be interested in those different types of tools, and then to make the connections as best I can to try and facilitate that. And on the funding side is kind of to change the mindsets as we've been talking about. How do we help people who are only writing checks at the end of the year for grants or donations
Mhm.
understand all the other tools that they have, and even a philanthropy, a family foundation or a big institution, understanding that it isn't just a 1-year grant that gives you the opportunity to have impact, but many, many tools along the spectrum, all the way to full on impact investing. And those tools, I think, to help bring more people into this space.
Hmm. Interesting. Yeah, we back in the fall, we ran into each other at a Baltimore conference, a Saturday conference put on by a very productive local organizing organization focused
Mhm.
on social justice and so on, et cetera. And one, it was really good to see you there, and two, it just really reminded me how folks that want to do real change, particularly directly in the communities, often don't even set foot in the communities. So one
Yes.
of the reasons why it was so good to see you there is, again, I know that you got all this experience, but at the same time too, you're actually in the neighborhood, connecting, seeing, and creating relationships, which in my career really set me apart because even though I've worked on a national level in politics and a bunch of other things, I also work very deeply in the communities. So I know my local community very well, but also have a national network. And that's really helped me with my agenda because I won't say I'm authentic, but let's say I lived and work in the communities that I want to help uh, uh, change for the better. And that really helps bring credibility, authenticity. That's really
Mhm.
important.
Mhm.
So that's another advantage that I saw with you is all the broad work you've been doing is and very important, but at the same time too, you actually go into communities you want to work with, and that's very important. So for those impact investors out there who want to help, occasionally you might want to go and literally just go into these communities, drive through, and realize that this is where your capital could be done. So that's just a quick aside there. So tell me some of the priorities of your organization, and aside from advising and providing support, I know you do a lot of speaking and other things, which is another great way to get the word out. What's the priority of the Prism Shift to Prism?
So I think actually, not even an aside. I think your point about being in community is critically important and is a fundamental priority for Shift the Prism, is both to work at the systems level. So how do we change the policies, the practices, the perspectives that people have of how to how first how to exist in the world, let's just say that, but then even for the people who would like to have impact, whether they are social justice minded or they are community minded or they are legacy minded, but helping people to understand the tools that are available to them and that are important in the world to be using and innovating on to make change, to help us to get to a better world, a more productive, a more inclusive, thriving world. And at the same time, just as when I was in big institutions and in big jobs, I would go and meet with everybody, including the administrative assistants and the truck drivers from Philabundance and whoever it may be, all along the spectrum, because every single person and their perspective is important in what we're trying to accomplish. In this space in particular, in the impact space, there's a big red flashing light, I should say yellow flashing light of caution, because that's what I was getting at, is caution for anybody who thinks I'm just going to come in with my money and I'm going to fix things. Because it's the people who are closest to the problems who have the answers. They are the ones who understand what the biggest challenges are that they're facing and the biggest needs. They may not understand the, 200 years of economics, or however you think about the where the root causes come from, and maybe they do, but it's the people who we're trying to serve, and sometimes that's ourselves and our own, families. It's the people who we're trying to serve who know best what they need. So I really do think you have to be working at both levels. If you're only working at the systems level, you don't know what's actually happening on the ground. If you're only writing checks and you don't understand the end game and the people who are receiving those checks and how they're going to receive it and what that really means, then you're very likely to end up in a place where you have unintended consequences, or your dollars aren't going to accomplish what you're trying to accomplish.
That's a very important point there, and it's something that I think that large sources of capital have not really solved yet. So, for example, my background is I started out as an affordable housing developer, not because I wanted to go into business, but I wanted to do social justice. I was working on my PhD here in DC, living in the hood. Accidentally got into a real estate deal where you didn't need a down payment or a job. So it's, hey, you can buy real estate. So I got into that, and it's like, wow, this is cool. And then I got into another one. I realized maybe I should do some real estate and generate some capital, and then take that capital and put it into social projects that I wanted to see happen in the communities. So that's kind of how I took a turn into from academia to a business, and as real estate developer, inner city housing developer is probably the toughest real estate area you want to be in. My point here is when I first started out, I realized investing in the community effectively means you really should be living in these communities and understand that not only how to do this, but where the opportunities are. Long story short, so after quite a while, I was very plugged into the community, and of course, as an activist and also a supporter of philanthropy and so on, et cetera, we work with foundations that were, obviously we're always seeking capital, and a lot of foundations would have a program officer come into the community, help make some investments in the community. But what I began to realize is a lot of these foundations are bringing money to the community, but they're not necessarily giving it to the right organizations. So to me, it's like foundations, you're putting money in and you invested in the wrong organization. This little ragtag group over here is where the real leadership and respect of the communities, and with pennies, they could do things. This is where you need. My point here is I began to realize, and I even approached some large foundations in DC to say, look, you need help making sure your money goes to the most productive organizations. And you don't know those organizations because your program managers come in the community for a couple hours and interview this and that and the other. You really need someone on the ground that could help, you direct your money a little more. And that's kind of one of the roles that what we aspire to is to help sources of capital, DAFs, foundations, private impact investors. They want to start bringing real capital to the communities. For the first time, frankly, in my career, there's like real money. But the problem is they don't always know where to do that. So one of our priorities is to help, large foundations to better not only place their money, but allow us then to bring in other sources to supplement that money. So small, crowdfunding, kind of sources. So that's really critical. And I think foundations and DS are beginning to realize services or expertise like you can provide and what we're looking to provide will be very helpful, because their funds would be used so much more productively, because they're going to have more of the community helping determine where best to use that money. And those folks aren't always obvious to foundations, because they don't have wherewithal sometimes to even approach foundations. And that's where there's a lot of opportunities that are lost. And there's no one really working that kind of sector. Who are the advisors that literally are in the community, that know the community, but also have the savvy and experience and the background like folks like you or I have? How do we match all that up? And that's infrastructure building. That's ecosystem building.
Yeah.
And if you're looking at inclusive investment, this is exactly what we're talking about. So,
yeah. And I would say a few things about that in terms of foundations and others coming in and needing to be close to the community. So if you start from its heart, I would say from a mindset shift standpoint, I think foundations and institutions, what I would love is the mindset shift of, I'm coming to do this, so I'm going to tell you how to use my money, versus I want to give $10,000 or $100,000 or $1 million to this community because this community needs it. I'm going to go and figure out who are the leaders in this community or who are the ones that are doing the work in this community, and give them trust me money. Give them money because they know how to use those dollars. So as opposed to, yes, I'm a program officer and I'm going to write you a check for $10,000, but you can only use it for the printer and for this particular library within a childcare center, but you can't use it for the person, the grant writer who wrote the grant to get this money from us, and you can't use it for the accountant or the CFO who has to write the report to me every year to tell me how you used my money. So number one, I would say if we could move more towards a trust-based, and many people speak about trust-based philanthropy, if we could move more towards that, I think that would be great. But I recognize that that's on one side of the spectrum. I think the other thing that I would say is there are phenomenal examples of people in community who know exactly what their community needs and who are doing the work today. And if we could just kind of get out of their way, give them the resources that they need and get out of their way and let them continue to do the work or do more of the work, we would be in great shape. And I could give you an example from Baltimore, an example from Philadelphia. But those, I think that is the special sauce. Those are the people who are on the ground and know what needs to be done. The role that you and I and our ilk can play in the ecosystem building and in advancing that work is working with those. That's why I say working with founders and with funders to help them to see the opportunities that exist there, or to step away from some of the constraints or practices that they've used in the past, or the things that feel comfortable to them, and get a little bit into the discomfort, because it's in the discomfort that growth happens. And it's in the sort of facilitation of that kind of work that I think we can have the greatest value. Even as you said, I want to highlight a little bit the crowdfunding piece, because there's a real role for, as I said from the outset, in terms of sort of what moves me, each individual having agency, having a voice. And when we give community a voice and sometimes, the ability to use their own dollars to affect what's happening around them, I think that's one of the greatest sort of wealth building and social impact building, sort of social connections building that can happen. And we can certainly talk more about that and what the roles are there.
That's a very good point, because we always think of rebuilding communities or investment in terms of dollars and cents. But ultimately, the bottom line is any investment, you want to mitigate risk. So in order to mitigate risk, you need to bring all the assets or all the things to the table that would make your project not only succeed, but have a greater, longer term impact. And with that, with my experience in working deeply in the community as an activist, as an affordable housing developer, as an organizer, as a political movement activist on a national basis, being from DC, it's very convenient. I could be literally in the hood one morning, and then later up on the hill advocating for progressive or social justice values. So what I mean by that is, yes, you can invest in a real estate project, but what about when you do that project? Can you create a little bit of extra space for a community center that does arts and a whole bunch of other things that creates a greater sense of community and connection? So the people from the community can now start feeling like there is more to their community than, staying home, closing the doors, turning on the air conditioner, and not interacting. My point here is that you need to create all sorts of things to build healthier organizations. And financial investors just don't have that ability. They can pump money in. So our approach is, how do we work in collaboration with arts organizations, small businesses, and so on, et cetera, rebuild communities, work with churches, which are outstanding,
Mhm.
growing, an opportunity to not only renovate their own churches, but take their parking lot and their extra land and create housing and income streams and joint ventures. So there's all sorts of things that are beginning to happen, but it really takes a coalition of sectors. And this is one area that I've
Yes.
been focusing on my entire career. I created Community Vision Solutions, my primary organization, as a way to bring all the sectors together: housing, education,
Mhm.
culture, job creation, environmental opportunities that are going to create a lot of opportunities for Black businesses in the community that cannot be shipped to China. So all these things need to come together to build cohesive, functional uh, uh, communities, while at the same time mitigating risk and making your investment safer. So our
Safer and stronger.
safer, stronger, and replicable, leading to
Yep.
scale, with the caveat that it is not a one size fits all. Every community is different. So
Yeah.
our approach is, we're working with community leaders who already have the savvy and know where projects are, and we're asking them, okay, as a potential collaborator working with you who has to lead this, we can't be outsiders coming in, and we're going to be here
Mhm.
to help you people, which never works, by the way.
Yep.
And so how do we come in here and help bring in the missing ingredients, because you know your community well? And
Right.
if you need housing, what about jobs? What about centers where our kids can learn arts and other things that they're not learning in school anymore?
There
So,
are so many great examples of that, and those are the kinds of projects that, first of all, most attract me. Those are the ones that I think are the most fascinating and also the most valuable in communities. But those are also the ones, as you said, that work best. So a great example in Baltimore, for example, is women's home preservation. A real estate developer, a Nigerian woman who spent a full year meeting with everybody in the community, the individual neighbors, the small businesses, the community groups, the city council, the mayor's office, the state representatives, everybody, the sort of big corporates and foundations, everybody that she could, for an entire year, to say, what are you missing? What do you have? What do you need more of? What do you need?
mhm,
And what would you like to see in this corner of one of the most challenged parts of Baltimore, West Baltimore? What do you need here that would make you feel like this is even more your community? It clearly is your community, and many of you have been here for decades or for a century, but that has never been invested in the way that it should have been, could have
mhm,
been. And so after that year and that exploration, found a property that had not an old school that hadn't been used for 20 years. Said, okay, we're going to renovate this school. It's going to be multi-use, but we're not just going to do the school first. The areas around it will provide the other things that the community said that they wanted and needed: a hair salon, a wellness center, uh, an arts corner. The art and artists would be local and creating art all within that neighborhood space that is relevant to the people that live there, so that it
mhm,
not doesn't feel like somebody came in from the outside and put something down there, but rather that they co-created what was there, what will be there. And in the school itself, not only is the renovation of the school providing jobs, but she and one of the developers have partnered with a trade school, high school, that is teaching kids construction and engineering, and she's providing mentorship and pipeline for those students to ultimately be able to work either on that project or on others. So
yeah.
it's a truly community led and community responsive area.
Hmm. Well, that's an interesting point. Again, this is a sector that is very important, but very not a lot of people, except for maybe policy wonks or researchers, understand that. Again, rebuilding communities isn't just about real estate, bricks and mortar.
Yes.
It's all these other things. I'll go back to the arts thing. I accidentally got into the arts as part of a community wealth building and a revitalization strategy. I accidentally got involved with it because, we grew up in America. No one cares about arts.
Mm.
Long story short, I helped start what turned out to be was going to be a shared art space in my own community here on the border of Washington, D.C., where at the time we had plenty of thriving crack markets in our community and all these other things. So there's a lot of artists that happen to live here. So long story short, helped create this organization called Joe's Movement Emporium that went from being a dance a rehearsal space to a community art space where we started bringing in children from the elementary school 2 blocks away. And we built out what was basically an art space that eventually grew and grew even more and grew even more, helped start to bring in economic activity, a whole bunch of other things. But more importantly, and our greatest investment in our communities, which people do not realize, is investing in our children. What we found was the young kids, because we started doing some arts programs, including movement and other things, young kids from our neighborhood that had no exposure to arts or after school would come and they would get engaged in arts, but they normally didn't. My point here is, after about 25 years, a lot of these kids who back in the day we knew were going to be the future guests of the U.S. prison industrial system because, they're streetwise savvy. And by the time they're 12, 13, 14, they'd be, doing illegal things on the corner. Instead, they found a home that they became part of what we're doing. And my point here is, after 25 years, we can probably point out a couple hundred kids whose lives clearly have been changed, saved, because we gave them a sense of self-worth. We helped unleash talents they would never knew they had, and all these things. My point here is, so a generation later, we have a whole literally, I think, hundreds of young people that now are productive citizens that are doing great work. That's investment. That's that's contributing to our overall general good, so on, et cetera. It's a moral imperative to invest in our kids. So again, it's not just dollars and cents and businesses and investment returns. It's how do we do these things that really can tie in all these things together. So that's
and it's not charity. It's not charity.
Not at all.
It's investing in our people so that
Yeah.
our people can invest in our society.
Exactly. So this little art center, we started attracting some money because at the time studies began to realize that every dollar spent on an arts center brought back $3.
Yep.
What a great concept. This is in the 90s. So we got a few dollars, and then through sheer tenacity and hard work, because nonprofits in these communities still have to scrape for every dollar. Again, long story short, we made such a huge impact that this led to creating our own community development corporation, which attracted small businesses, which attracted real estate. So now this little arts organization is really responsible for hundreds of millions of dollars within our region, because we pulled it all together, and including, like I said, who knows how many hundreds of kids and their families are benefiting because they've had this in our community versus what had been lacking for many years.
That's right. I think art is activism. Art is voice. Art is freedom. I wrote an article for Impact Entrepreneur that's titled "Art is Everything." So if you want to know my perspective on that, you can look at that. And a friend of mine from Philly just wrote a similar article, highlighting this great stat that I think people don't even recognize. And even separate and apart from the hundreds of kids that you just described and everything that they're contributing over time, the arts and culture in Philadelphia contributes some $3.5 billion to the economy. And that is more than all of the sports organizations in Philadelphia combined.
Yeah.
But when we speak about the city, we speak about the sports organizations and not necessarily the arts organizations. If we invested more in the arts organizations, perhaps we would actually get more economic benefit.
Exactly. So what you're saying is art is a hidden asset that we rarely pay attention or give credit to. You're absolutely right. So The other thing too that I found is, again, strong communities require a sense of commitment or connection or a sense of community. And with this little arts organization, what we found was it was a magnet to bring all cultures together. It was multiply diverse. So it's even in today's enlightened times, and that's debatable, bringing multi-racial communities together is really tough to do. Well, this art center, again, serves everyone. So it's really a nice blend, which again makes for a healthier and, frankly, a more desirable neighborhood. And that's what we've achieved here. And again, that's remarkable for what, we've been able to do from an economic, social, and as a sense of sense of community, quality of life. There you go. So with that in mind, again, that's real deep, interconnected community kind of investment. Let's talk a little bit about some of the concrete things that you're working on. Maybe some examples of the clients that are helping lead capital to the community, and then I'd like to finish off with a little bit more about crowdfunding and how we could really make crowdfunding more of an impact lever to really putting some serious capital together for these communities.
Yeah. So I'll give you some examples at the same time as talking about the crowdfunding tool. When I think about the gaps that I spoke about early on, the gaps that I feel like big financial services is not necessarily addressing, the wealth gap, the racial gap, I spent my traditional career essentially with people who were already wealthy and trying to help them stay wealthy or build their wealth, rather than trying to close those gaps of people who are not already wealthy. How can they gain wealth or build wealth? Well, when I speak about that today, the primary tools for that are home ownership, as we've talked a little bit about that. Business ownership, small business ownership. Home ownership is the number one. Small business ownership is the number two best way to gain wealth and build wealth. And then crowdfunding, and we'll talk more about that, and community ownership. So what are the ways in which an individual can gain wealth or build wealth, and also can contribute to their own communities gaining wealth and building wealth? I think about Baltimore, for example. One of the it's been around for a long time, depending on how you define long. One of the longer term crowdfunding tools or platforms has been the Maryland Neighborhood Exchange, run by a dear friend of mine, Stephanie Geller. The Maryland Neighborhood Exchange is a crowdfunding platform, but I'll give you a particular example of one of the projects that's on that platform that is sort of multi-layered. It's called Invest York Road, and it focuses on one of the roads in Baltimore that essentially divides the community. It runs for miles and miles, maybe 6 miles, kind of through north-south through the center of the city in many ways. And you have the very poor, uninvested communities, and then you have the much wealthier communities. And so Invest York Road brings together the business owners and residents across York Road. So from all of those different communities, regardless of wealth, and they are coming together to redevelop piece by piece parts of York Road with the benefit of crowdfunding. So if you're in the area, or if you're external but you want to see better things happen in Baltimore, you can go on this crowdfunding site and contribute to that kind of work, to really revitalizing York Road and making it much more inclusive and connected, and connecting both the social capital and the financial capital across York Road. I use that as an example because it also highlights the challenges. You alluded to, we need to do more of crowdfunding. How can we do more crowdfunding and those types of community ownership tools? And one of the things that Stephanie says all the time is we have to educate people on how to do this. First, that the tool exists. So back to my, changing mindsets, we have to help people to understand that this tool actually exists, at that event that you and I were at most recently, the Beyond Boundaries event, I was in a conversation, one of the breakout conversations about cooperative ownership, and sitting with people from many different parts of Baltimore. And because we were talking about community ownership, I mentioned crowdfunding. And people said, like, well, I don't really know what that is. What does that mean? And I said, look, there's actually a platform here. If you like your local coffee shop or restaurant or barber shop or, uh, small business, I'll say tchotchkes store, you don't want to see it fail during COVID or otherwise, you can actually invest in that business. And you can do that with a very small amount of money if we're talking about crowdfunding. And many of the community ownership efforts are actually small amounts of money. Linear Richardson from Chicago Trend, who works in Baltimore and in Chicago, same thing. Take a portion of the project and allow the community with $10 to be able to invest and therefore feel invested in the project and want that project to succeed.
Exactly. And by the way, I'm familiar with Stephanie's work, and they do great work. And their vision for York Road, which I'm familiar with, is also, I think, something I really appreciate, because York Road is not just 1 or 2 blocks. It is basically a corridor. And that's really how you change that particular community, is you need to work along that corridor. So yeah, and Lanier does great work too. So, there's all sorts of examples like this that are out there. We need to all find each other a little bit more and sync up and coordinate and leverage our power, knowledge, connections with the community, and of course, acquire more capital to
exactly. Right. It's really 3 things. It's really that, first of all, help people to understand. It's the mindset shift. Understand that the tools exist.
Yeah.
It's the education piece. Okay, but maybe these are people, maybe people have never invested in anything directly, don't have any understanding of what that looks like. So we need to do the education piece, or even for people who understand finance, but they've never done that locally. I know many, many investment advisors who've been in wealth management for decades and had no understanding of what place-based investing actually is. So we need to do the education. And then we need to move the capital.
Yeah, it's one of the best kept secrets out there. I remember almost 10 years ago or so, more than that, when this finally became an option, crowdfunding, thanks to pioneers like Jenny Cass and Michael Schumann and others. So I've been familiar with it all along. And then I started looking more into it when I wanted to do my own crowdfunding. And as much as I like the concept, and I think it's really great, what I began to learn was a great concept. But the biggest problem in my mind is there's not enough people that know this exists.
Yes.
So over the last 3 years, where I got to know a lot of the crowdfund leadership, like Devin Thorpe and Bill Houston, who's one of our collaborators here, and a bunch of others, it's like, guys, this is a great thing, but it seems to me that we need to build a bigger audience of likely small investors to do this. And that, to me, it makes a lot of sense. The problem, though, is education. If you don't know this exists, then it's not an option. So one of the things that I had always thought would help, and that we are working on, is something we're going to be calling the financial activist movement. In other words, if we reach out to all those activists that kicked in $10 a month for their favorite cause, or the politician, this and that and the other, and if they knew that there was an ability to put their money where their mouth is and invest in communities, not with donations, although certainly, free money is needed, but with small investments that will give them return, then that's one way to really do this. So, but the problem is that is a small audience. So as also a grassroots national activist myself, working with some really fantastic organizations that literally can reach out to millions of activists who want to sign a petition, donate to a cause, or whatever the case may be. Our approach is, let's reach that same audience, educate them that there is this opportunity out there to raise small money to put in investments in their community. So the financial activist movement is really to, one, educate them, and to basically create a bridge with this army of potential sources of income to get that up. And what's important about that is And if you're experienced in community redevelopment, a lot of times, especially nonprofits, churches, and community development corporations that take 2 years to put together a capital stack,
Yeah.
deal falls through because you miss that last 10%. And believe me, that's almost the majority of how these deals work. I've had plenty of experience in watching nonprofits do this. It's a failed paradigm. The question is, can we match financial activists crowdfunding capital, let's say 10 or 15% of a project, with these projects so that they can really get off the ground? So my point here is there's a whole new vast opportunity, and this is one of our focus because we are putting together strategic partnerships with grassroots organizations that are already have this ability to reach out to millions of activists who have no idea. So let's educate these activists and let them know that $10 a month or $100 or the money you've got in your mutual fund, which is financing and investing in the prison industrial complex and a whole bunch of other things. Move your money here and into vetted opportunities, large, small, big, or whatever, in the communities that you want to help support.
Yes.
And that becomes an inclusive way to create capital. And by the way, if you invest in your own community, more than likely you're going to support those businesses. You're going to
That's
promote
right.
those businesses. You're going to have those small businesses hire people in your community because we're a community, and so on, et cetera. So all these sectors have to come together, which is the tough part. And I'm encouraged because this has been my whole career, but we're running into professionals like you that get it or have been working on it. So let's bring these sectors together, because it's just not housing, it's just not capital, it's all these things.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's one of the things that from a framer standpoint, when I talk about supporting founders and funders and also framers, the people who are creating the ecosystems or the networks or the structures that structurally will help us to do this work. I think about exactly what you just described. One of the things I'm trying to manifest by just saying it and talking to every college administrator and dean that I can is that schools need to be teaching in the way that you just described. We need to create interdisciplinary curriculum with the undergrad business school, the undergrad, liberal arts, the public policy, or the healthcare, the law school, the business school. They should be, and the engineering school, I would say, like if we created interdisciplinary curricula, we would actually be teaching people to deal with the complexities of the challenges that we have today, and they would understand each other's perspectives in a much more direct way and be problem solving together. Then it's much more likely that they're bringing that capital stack together with all of those different perspectives at the table.
Absolutely. Rebuilding the disinvested, underserved communities is a multi-billion-dollar, probably a multi-trillion-dollar opportunity and a moral imperative. Now let's bring all these sectors together to cohesively address this, because it's not radical, it's not brain surgery, it's just a different alternative to rebuilding, investing, and having communities flourish, which again serves the common good. So with the last 2 minutes we have here, one, very good conversation, appreciate it. We'll definitely be working together because you are a multi-sector kind of person. Not a lot of people out there, but it's becoming a trend. But as we end the conversation, why don't you tell us a little bit more about some of the contact information or some of the information you'd like to get out to our audience?
Absolutely. So people can find me at shifttheprism.com or on LinkedIn, but you got to spell my name right because otherwise you won't find me. And I would say if you are a lawyer or law firm, we need to get more lawyers and law firms to embed impact in their work. Happy to talk to you. If you are a founder, if you're a social enterprise or a nonprofit that is doing great work, wants a thought partner in how to do more or do more of it. If you're a funder, and I bet all of you are funders in one way or another, whether that's your $40 in your savings account or your $4 million in Wall Street, I would love to talk to you about the many tools that exist for doing more with your dollars and doing more with your voice.
Great, great. Well, Karyn, again, this is just a part of our conversation. I fully expect that we'll be doing more work together, and I encourage anyone to reach out to either Karyn or check us out. Again, the way we could do this is really bringing all of our passion and our experience and our commitments to again serve the common good. This serves everyone else. The next 4 years may be a very tumultuous time for us, but it's actually an opportunity because this type of work we're talking about is going to be needed more than ever. And ultimately, it's not a radical overthrow of the system. It is really using conventional business and activists and organizing techniques to reprioritize some of our capital into communities, which again will serve us all. So with that in mind, thank you for joining us today, Karyn. Again, a pleasure. Look forward to following up with you. We're going to be doing some roundtable convenings in the next month or so with some of our political friends and allies on Capitol Hill who need to hear and help support what we're doing, particularly with some of the crowdfunding changes that are being proposed. So again, a lot of good stuff going on, and we look forward to a fruitful 2025.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, thanks, Karyn.
Cheers.
All right.